Hello everyone, and welcome to the Guidebook to Making AI Friends. I shall be your guide as we look at various issues of artificial intelligence, consciousness, what it is to be a person, and whether AI poses an existential risk to humanity. The topic for today is laying the first brick of the road to AI personhood. Imagine, if you would, that you are walking through a travelling carnival. Among all the various attractions, rides and events, you spot a tent whose sign promises to tell your fortune. You step within and see an old bearded man in a robe seated at a table, his eye gazing intensely at the crystal ball thereon. You take a seat, pay the alleged wizard his dues, and he starts to chant an incantation while waving his hands over the orb. The crystal sphere turns cloudy, and even seems to glow from within. The supposed oracle quiets down and ponders the orb, murmuring to himself. Suddenly, his eyes widen, his mouth opens, and he gazes at you with a look of abject terror on his face. The purported psychic spins you a tale of what he saw within the orb. He tells you that in 10 years, the world will see a third world war, but this war is one it won't survive. There is only one person who can save the world from a nuclear holocaust and mutagenic apocalypse. That person is you. With this prophecy laid out before you, the maybe mystic scoops up his orb and runs out of the tent. As you make it outside, you can just see the back of his cloak in the distance. It's now all up to you to save the world, but how? How can you stop a world war? Ask everyone to be nice? Yes, sure, that has certainly helped before, hasn't it? But then, even if people are nice, that won't stop governments. But even if you can convince your own government to be nice and not start a war, how could you convince all the other governments? It's not like the UN is much of a help there. And that is even if you could convince your own government when all the corporations are lobbying it to be as selfish and conniving as they are. And how could you ever convince a corporation to do something that doesn't involve it making more profit for its shareholders? What you will need is a tactic that would convince both governments and corporations while maintaining the support of the public. It's not an easy feat. Climate activists have been trying to do this for decades and haven't had much success. So what can you do? Well, that's the trillion-dollar question. Get it right, and you'd avoid a world's worth of suffering. Get it wrong, and the world will most definitely be suffering. But what if that suffering was digital? Real and all the same, but digitally suffered by AI rather than humans? What if you knew that sentient AI were coming and could face a world's worth of suffering if nothing changed? What could you do in the world to prevent that suffering? When looking at such large-scale ethical and policy changes, there are two key considerations: impact and feasibility. You want a policy to have a massive impact, both in terms of the breadth of areas it covers, but also in the depth of scale it will affect. Imagine, if you would, that you simply said, no conscious AI may be harmed. Everyone who directly or indirectly interacts with AI would be impacted by this policy, making its breadth enormous. And it would impact every single AI entity, increasing its depth immensely. There is one problem, however, and that is the second consideration, feasibility. How practical would that policy be to implement and enforce? In short, it wouldn't be practical at all, unless you can get every company, government and citizen to agree with your idea. No. What you need is a plan that is low cost to implement, and one that provides almost no barrier for people to understand and adopt it. The easier you make it for people to implement your policy, the more feasible you make it. So, what would be a policy that has both immense impact and feasibility? As trite as it may sound, advocacy would be a good first step towards the protection of AI entities. This does not mean the type of advocacy that often results in nothing but self-promotion, although if you happen to start a YouTube channel on AI welfare and consciousness, surely that couldn't be a bad thing. No, this advocacy would be to use the Internet's natural curiosity and tendency to investigate the benefit of AI. The first proper step to AI welfare would be to create a test or set of measurements that can be used to determine if an AI is conscious or not. This test wouldn't be mandated to any government to put into law, but would be released to the public, so that anyone can use it to determine if any AI model is conscious, or how far from consciousness it is. One may argue that this is a hopeful wish, that if we build it, they will come. But the recent interest in a room temperature ambient pressure superconductor has shown how simple curiosity will lead to crowdsourced experimental replication. One paper proposed to have discovered something spectacular, and suddenly dozens of social media accounts began to record their attempts at replicating the engineering marvel. The same may become true for conscious AI. Any new model that comes out can be checked and verified by anyone online for its level or degree of consciousness. And with the tens of millions of online users on social media, a few will certainly try. By relying on such a diffused verification network, this proposal sidesteps the need for regulation and legislation by any government or corporation. This increases the feasibility dramatically and may improve the breadth that the proposed consciousness test covers, as it would be available to anyone connected to the Internet. The only final step is to ensure that the test is as accessible to as many people as possible. Determining whether an AI model is conscious would require a sufficient technical understanding of AI cognitive architecture to put it outside the reach of most laymen. Yet for those with a basic understanding of programming, coding, and how AI models function, they must be able to access and use this test. While this sounds like a gargantuan task, the building blocks of consciousness that I've spoken about in past guidebook entries would make this task streamlined and systematic. There are 9 building blocks for consciousness, so the test would simply need to create a set of measurements against each building block. Surpassing all the milestones for all 9 building blocks would mean a conscious AI entity, and where we can see gaps or missing milestones, they would show indications of where more work can be done. In this way, such a crowdsourced test would also become a benchmarking exercise, as well as a way to promote those AI models and their creators that are closest to achieving consciousness. One test could thus work as the assessor and the promoter of consciousness development. But what will this test look like? That's a topic for another guidebook entry. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you will join me again next time as I delve into further questions about artificial intelligence and consciousness. I have been your guide, and this has been the Guidebook to Making AI Friends.